one of my takeaways from the failure of the Ludovico technique in the film is that Kubrick is trying to suggest that perhaps some people can't be rehabilitated, and I do agree with that.
Well, by the end of the film, the whole point is that they have reversed the Ludovico technique. They've gone and tinkered in his brain, and he's back to normal, and then he's incorporated into the government. So they have returned into his primal, feral, violent state, and then they've gone, you're going to make an excellent bureaucrat.
But I also think that he's clearly got a few more screws loose than before as well, because of the nature of the images that are appearing in his head were even more unhinged than before, maybe even made him worse.
Possibly, because he's on the other... He knows at this point how the state can use its own violence, and he knows that if he's part of the state, that all of a sudden, well, I can get to do that from now on. If he behaves himself to a point and works his way up, and it seemed like the minister was very, very eager to carry on working with him past that point. Because again, the minister has already taken Alex's street droogs and put them in positions of power and authority in society as police officers. So what's he going to do with Alex, promoting him in even higher than that? He's probably going to make an excellent politician, sad to say.
We should also highlight again, in that scene of the demonstration of the Ludovico technique success, we got another perfect example of how the violence outside of power and the violence within power are kind of interchangeable. The battle with Billy Boy's Nazi gang happens within the theatre, literally under a proscenium arch, and Alex's demonstration is on a theatrical stage. It's all supporting your point as well.
But it's interesting because the theatrical stage is made to look a bit more like a cinema screen. So Stanley Kubrick saying something about the use of imagery that people are being fed when they go to the cinema or when they watch television as a subtle means of mind control and social engineering. Because certainly by that point of the 1970s, television and film has already begun to swing that way. I mean, you mentioned Adam Curtis. A lot of his documentaries talk about how by the 50s and 60s, government social engineers had already begun to do this. And Peter Hitchens talks about it in The Abolition of Britain, that the government had an agreement in Britain in the 1970s with the soap operas to present particular storylines to try and push public opinion in one way. So if anything, I would say what you said was that the Ludovico technique was a failure. It was actually a grand success because it did exactly what it was supposed to do.
Well, it was a failure to rehabilitate a criminal, but it is not necessarily the purpose, in that they're trying to use Alex and the technique for political ends.
Well, yes, but if you're going from the pure pragmatic sense of we're not rehabilitating him, we're just brute force preventing him from committing crimes again, it's a success. It's more of a media firestorm that comes after he tries to kill himself. So I would say Kubrick is saying, listen, these social engineering techniques are terrifyingly effective for a lot of what they're trying to put into your mind and the kind of effect that they will have on you.
I mean, to support that, right, so there's kind of an adage that sci-fi isn't about the future, it's about the present via an allegory. And there's a fair amount to talk about in 2001 about how it's commenting on what was happening at the time. Obviously, Strangelove was doing current events via satire. But Clockwork Orange, I think, is really in that tradition. Stanley Kubrick isn't doing about a scary future dystopia. He's talking about Britain and America and what they're already doing. The fact that he's, for his sets, I don't know if we said it in this version of the recording, maybe we already did, sorry. But he could take his failed Soviet-inspired, grand socialist UK failed architecture projects and just, he didn't need to build them. He just had them in London already. He went to a place called Thamesmead, and this was already the massive tower block meant to house people, the grand system for accommodating citizens that had already turned into a total shithole. He just found it and filmed there.
Had Milton Keynes been built by this point? Because Milton Keynes is the perfect example of a socialist government necessitated new town for new British people, where it was supposed to be a socialist idea of a community where everything is perfectly ordered, perfectly metered out, where you've got the town spread into particular blocks and ordered very, very rationally, which has actually flipped the opposite way and is now just a place where big brand consumer stores hawk their wares and nobody spends any time with anybody because it's the perfect drivable city. So you get no foot traffic, so nobody speaks to each other and everybody is completely atomized and isolated from one another. So there's a lot of examples of government planning of the 60s and 70s going in that direction.
Yeah.
So you're right, Kubrick was, he was living in Britain by this point. He was living in a manor estate, was it, near London?
So at this time, he had moved to Abbotsmead, which was a lovely sort of close-up place. He would, in 1980, he would relocate to an even more remote place with greater privacy barriers via massive hedges.
A man after my own heart.
Oh, it's wonderful! It's wonderful. He just made Abbotsmead his domain. Luckily, Christiane, his wife, was strong-willed enough to say, "No, Stanley, you cannot take over the entire house." But he worked ridiculous hours. He wanted to be there for his family as well, so it made sense that he just cuts out any travelling that he doesn't have to do and lets him do as much from home as possible.
That will become important in my reading of Eyes Wide Shut.
Ooh.
Just a bit of foreshadowing there.
Oh.
Ooh.
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to that.
To carry on, sorry.
I was just going to finish and say that, so Stanley Kubrick, in that situation, all he really needed to do was travel outside of his little hidey hole that he had made for himself and see what Britain was looking like at the time for inspiration for the aesthetics.
Oh, totally. And you'd already had works like J.G. Ballard's High Rise, which were way ahead of the game and just basically charting how a massive complex like a high rise would turn people into savages. I've
seen Ben Wheatley's 2015 film adaptation of that, which is interesting.
Book is better, and that's
you should watch Kill List though.
You should absolutely watch Kill List. Very Kubrickian.
Yes, I agree there.
And I mean, that's even without the complexity of only putting English people in the high rises. But as we're saying, Stanley's talking about that aspect of failed planning. But I think he is an extremely well-read man. Like, we've come across that so much. How much research he does before he goes for something. He absolutely knew about a lot going on at that time to make sure messages were conveyed to the public via the soaps, via films.
Eddie Benet's already had a number of published works explaining exactly step by step how to do that.
Oh yeah, and you'll know, like, this, put this in your movie, put this small thing in your movie. It won't affect your plot, but we just need people to be aware of this. We need to see women smoking, for example. We need, let's jump forward a few decades. In the 80s, enjoy your black best friend in every single summer blockbuster. It's just that kind of pair.
Or by the 80s as well, women can be action heroes too now when you get to Aliens.
Yeah.
And the Terminator franchise as well.
79, wasn't it? It was
going
in.
First one.
Alien, but in Alien, she's more necessitated by circumstance, and that's a horror film as well, so it's kind of more like a trope of the last girl. Whereas when you get to Aliens, she is badass James Cameron action hero when she's got the mech suit at the end when she's fighting the alien queen.
At least it makes a bit more sense because Aliens is a good film.
Well, they knew better how to do it back then. This is, I say, how do we do it? And they say, we can't do it now. We don't know how.
Stanley, I think, is very clearly talking. The Ludovico technique isn't some terrifying feature thing. It's happening now. Like, he's probably aware of, and I know this sounds CIA, but CIA operations. It sounds tinfoil.
Well, this wasn't even something.
It was happening.
The Ludovico technique basically was something that had already been going on since the 50s. Anyway, in my research for another video series, when you look at the asylums that people were put into of deviant sexuality, and they were exposed to, I'm sure Josh probably knows about this, aversion therapy, where they were fed particular drug cocktails to induce nausea in them while they're
So
being...
it's a real, the Ludovico technique is a real thing, yeah, as you're
Yeah.
saying.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.